Okay, everyone. So we are going to look at another PowerPoint presentation. Looks like we made it to the back. Sorry about that. Okie dokie. So we are going to talk about texture because now you are going to try to draw your object with texture on it. And this is the last part 4 of your drawing that you will have fun creating. And I really hope that this general exercise actually has made you all better drawers, which is really important, I think, as a foundation for being a good designer. Anyways, we're going to talk about texture. Free, broken, and textured outlines and surface embody a quality of freshness and add to a more contemporary character in the work. The surfaces of objects or areas express a variety of personalities by their textures. This is the beginning quote by Kenneth F. Bates. He wrote this book that I really like about just the basic introduction to design. It goes on to say, applying textures by a tool, a medium, or a technique takes on a particular emphasis in design. So pretty much he's just saying here that texture can be used to really create a crispness of your design. I really think it can make work quite fun. I'm a huge fan of textures within art, as you can probably tell by this assignment that I'm giving you. So first we're going to talk about rendered texture. We're going to break down texture into 2 different groups and how artists approach texture in 2 different ways. The first way is rendered texture, which is what you will be doing for this assignment. You're going to be rendering a texture onto your object or simulating a texture onto your object. Rendered texture is when an artist simulates a real texture with skilled drawing techniques. As you can see here, there are some examples of just some spheres that have different textures on them. What I can notice about this is that there is a use of repetition in each one of these. As you can see, this is all kind of crosshatch sort of line work, but there is a repetition of lines. There's also a variation. So let's look at this one. So these little white marks here are not all the same size. They vary in shape and size. And the edges, of course, edges are really important. If you can see the edge of the sphere here, I can definitely kind of get the sensation that it's rather fuzzy. And also repetition, variation, edges, and what else? Value. That's right, what we've been working on this entire time. So these are 4 things to remember when creating a texture: value to capture volume, repetition, variation, and edges. This is an artist, Ileana Tejada, and she is a San Francisco-based artist who does some performance work. She's a bodybuilder, and she incorporates that into her art. She's very strong woman, does these life-size drawings on big panels of paper with just simply only a mechanical pencil. And she talks a lot about her, how she engages with her own femininity and is quite playful. She really loves talking about her femininity as being strong and soft at the same time. And so she sort of worked the storytale of the chupacabra into her idea of like sort of this soft and strong female role model or icon, which is always in her artwork perceived as herself. But notice how she uses value to create volume within her own hair and within the texture of the hair that is growing throughout her body, which is, I think, believe that she just actually observes and looks at a stuffed teddy bear in her bedroom to help her define what texture looks like, because she's posing 2 different she's imposing hair onto her skin. So she has to be somewhat creative and imaginative to figure out how to do this. Another wonderful artist, Amy Cutler. This is a 11 color lithograph. So this is a form of printmaking titled Opal's Departure. It has 11 different colors in it, believe it or not, even though it looks rather subdued and neutral in color. There's color in there. And Amy's work, or Cutler's work, is derivative of a lot of like folklore and children's book and storytelling, but then she creates it in a way that are kind of dark at the same time, which I think is actually really what is so appealing about a lot of children's stories in general. One reason that we enjoy them. Anyways, her work is very design based in a way that she always likes to use really simple forms within a blank background. And we're going to talk more about how that works with negative and positive space. But for now, we're just looking at the way that she uses texture. It's really simple. Using wood grain is a really great thing to look for. If you don't know what texture to use to make your object look like, you can always try to observe some wood grain maybe lying around, or even like the bark of a tree. But there's wood grain here. I'm using line to create the texture of the hair. There's some straw coming out of this barrel, and even little hints of line that make this luggage bag feel like it has volume. And also, I guess this would be maybe perhaps a bag as well, and using texture to create a pattern to insinuate that this is a cloth bag that can hold things. So yeah, her work is really cool. We'll probably look at more of it this semester. So another artist that simulates and renders texture and without all of his work is Kehinde Wiley. And I just love this portrait of former President Obama, and this painting is pretty famous. I would say it was probably like one of the most famous paintings of the year. It came out a couple years ago. It's in the Smithsonian now. And so Kehinde Wiley likes to traditionally paint in oil in a very traditional way, is what I meant to say. And so obviously an expert at capturing value. I mean, look at these hands are like crazy. And also like the skin feels very kind of hyper realistic because Wiley's super aware of form and value and just a really strong traditional oil painter. But we're looking at the way that the background is existing right here in this painting, and it's all rendered, the rendered like hedge and of a garden with some flowers that are poking out. So oftentimes Kehinde Wiley, like Wiley's thing is to portray Black men, and oftentimes famous Black men, traditionally in oil paint with sort of this sort of like high Renaissance, or sort of actually more like Rococo. Rococo is an art style that came out of France during the same time, like the Baroque period and Caravaggio, who we looked at. But he uses Black male bodies in this very regal way. And yes, very much all of his work is talking about regality and just really putting Black men in these positions of being kind of like treated in a way like kings, like paintings that exist, old paintings that exist of kings as we know, and like in the more European tradition. So his work is really beautiful, and there's actually another piece of his in this slideshow that is really moving. But yes, very, very like controlled use of oil paints and lighting and value to create these really realistic leaves, this leaf texture throughout the entire background of this portrait of Obama. And here is another piece by Patrick Martinez. This is titled Protest Peachy, Activist Athletes. A little backstory on what a peachy is. A peachy is like a trapper keeper that came out, I think, like in the 50s. It's just this older trapper keeper. I don't know if you've ever seen one before, but normally on a peachy folder, or always normally, is always a depiction of students that are white students that are going about in school, whatever, participating at the athletic activities and succeeding in school, doing a good job in school. So what Patrick Martinez does is he paints the peachy label, and he then creates which is, you know, creating a type of texture in itself, like a smooth texture, to remind us of what a peachy trapper keeper portfolio folder looks like. And then using texture within with his skilled set of artistry and capturing value, to paint these athletes, these Black athletes that are victorious and winning at what they're doing, just kind of creating a commentary about reclaiming or reinvestigating what is just a common school item that all of us have to grow up with, and reinterpreting that to make it more accessible to people of color. So then texture, as a result of technique or tool, has more intrinsic value than that which is superficially applied. So this means that sometimes we don't always render texture or simulate texture by using value with like our pencils or with our pens. Sometimes we create a different value of the work using materials. So an example is a texture by medium, a technique or tool, and how this can actually create a different intrinsic value to a piece of art. So there is an example here, just really quick, like we don't have watercolors in our class, but I love looking at watercolor examples. I mean, there's like the way that one can use watercolor is with wet watercolor on wet paper, wet watercolor on dry paper. This is an example of when your watercolor is on your brush feels kind of dry, so you can see how it's kind of like a bumpy brush stroke, and it goes on. But we can see that, like, if an artist wanted to, they could use this type of texture to any of these textures to maybe advocate for their message a little bit farther. So, and one example of this is these 14th century Persian miniature paintings, which are really like delightful. They are rather flat in their composition, in their perspective, excuse me. Their composition is really actually really well balanced and harmonious, but there's often this use of like gold leaf, and gold leaf is a texture that would be used as not rendered or simulated, but just by a medium. So using something like gold leaf, something like watercolor can help maybe define or create a message within a design or art piece. This is Elan Corbell, and he's actually a former teacher of mine, and he taught me a lot about collage, and I really had fun working with him because he kind of taught me that in collage, there is this sort of like anything goes kind of mentality as far as the way that we want to use texture with even more than just paper. But he kind of taught me the best approaches to doing collage and creating textures and kind of rendering form within with different textures. So he had this method called painting papers. He was French, and he would always call them painting papers, which was kind of endearing for me. Sorry, I'm going down a memory lane right now. But anyways, so in the painting paper process, we would just take acrylic paints and our even color pencil, and we would create a whole bunch of different textured bundle of papers that would get crinkly as they dried. We would put a whole bunch of books on them and they would flatten out. And then we would look at, you know, what colors and values are working together within those few papers, and then also look at different textures and use them very playfully, extremely playfully, to create different forms or different 2D images. So Elan is he's he's well known for his illustrations, does a lot of children's book stuff, and it's always very like lighthearted and colorful and just very cute. And then, so just getting into like more traditional collage, or how people actually think of collage. This wonderful artist, Wangechi Mutu, is really cool. I've always loved her work. She's Kenyan, and this piece is called The Primary Syphilitic Ulcers of the Cervix. It made in 2005, and it is made with collage on found medical illustration paper. So Mutu likes to conflate gender, race, and art history within her work. A lot of the times, you know, she's talking about how American influence on African culture is, you know, insidious, and how it can be quite invisible. And so she's creating visibility by taking, a lot of the time she takes images from like magazines and stuff of Black women and deconstructs them into these motifs where they become like larger than life. I think this is relatively small, this work, but her work tend to be really big. And you can create these messages really simply by using different already like found textured materials. So that, yeah, the texture of the hair. I mean, this old illustration has its own like sepia texture to it. And this is also just using like a brown packing tape to create the neck to sort of hint at that there is a neck that exists in this crazy deconstructed image of this like a Black woman that's superimposed over a medical illustration of cervix. And there's definitely like there's a lot of talk about science fiction, and sometimes she even like takes sequins or glitter or sparkles and hair, and she'll put those actual textures into her collages, which then just open this doorway for bigger conversations to talk about these bigger concepts of what she's talking about within science fiction, Black visibility, and insidious nature of American culture on Black people. And also she is categorized into what is called art movement of Afrofuturism. And then once again, oh, I just love this image. It's Kehinde Wiley. This is a stained glass piece that he did, and it's just like it's so incredibly moving. But yes, it's made out of stained glass, and you know, it is a different material. It's a completely different texture, and it's this texture, this use of material and texture as stained glass opens up this gateway into talking about how we experience stained glass, which is in this very epic, monumental, spiritual way that is connotating towards, you know, the church, and how that's when, you know, when we often see that it was in a church, in a place of spirituality. So he takes his common motif of Black men, Black figures, and in this case, he is making a huge commentary on highlighting the lives of those that we have lost, unfortunately. But he does it in a very beautiful way. And this is something, you know, we're not going to be doing any stained glass work or anything like that, but now you can see hopefully a little bit more about how texture can be artistically rendered, but it also can be used to create a larger message as well by how the artist applies it to the images that they're working with. So something to keep in mind for the future. Okay, I hope you enjoyed.